Good morning. My name is Claudia Rossi, and I am very grateful to have convened this panel of experts and community servants and leaders to discuss the 2018 grand jury recommendation in light of the current event of the firing of Santa Clara County Office of Education, Dr. Marianne Dewan. And I am very grateful to introduce some very excellent public servants that will take a deeper dive on the 2018 grand jury recommendation in an effort to really inform the community about what is at stake and hopefully prompt a discussion that will be of service to all of you. I'd like to start by introducing our panelists. Thank you, Peter Hortan, for joining us, and each of them will give us a little background on their resumes in public service. Welcome, Peter Hortan. I'd like to also introduce Harry Overhelman. Thank you for being here today and joining us. And also Steve Batondo. Thank you. And I'll start with Peter. Peter, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I am an engineer. I worked for IBM for 18 years. And when I turned 40, I said, I'm here in Silicon Valley. How could I work for only one company when all these startups are here? So I left to go with startups. And so I've been with 8 startups now, averaging about 5 years each, while my wife had the very stable job, still working for IBM. So I always had the spirit for public service. And so every opportunity I had to help out in the schools or in government commissions, I joined those. And one day, one of the others in one of my commissions said, you should be on the civil grand jury, which I knew nothing about. Mm-hmm. And so I applied, and it was kind of random who gets picked. So I was fortunate enough to be picked for the 2016-17, and then I held over for the 2017-18, and found it a very rewarding activity. I also worked for various commissions in the county. The County Elections Commission, which is called the Citizens Advisory Commission on Elections, and the VTA. They have 5 different advisory commissions, and I was on one for about 5 years, and I was chair of that for several years, as I was for the Elections Commission. I similarly was on 3 different commissions in the town of Los Gatos, where I'm a resident. So that's my reward.
You were also an elected trustee.
Yes. So I ran after the grand jury. So when I left that, I realized, I should take some of the thoughts I had about what should be changed in the way of how school districts operate. And I ran for the Los Gatos-Saratoga Union High School District and was elected. I got the Chinese vote because they thought my last name was Chinese because it ends with Tan.
Yes.
And so I served for 1 4-year term. My wife said, it's time to start traveling again. COVID's over.
Yes.
So I didn't run for another term, which I regret, but family comes first.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Harry Overhelman, tell us a little bit about yourself, and thank you again for being here.
My pleasure. I'm a retired civil attorney, been retired since 2017. Primarily, my practice has been in public law. For 23 years, I was in the County Counsel's Office of Santa Cruz County, representing many of their departments, handling litigation. I then spent 10 years as a attorney in charge of the legal office for this California State Compensation Insurance Fund, which is a quasi-state agency that provides workers' compensation insurance for those employers who are unable to find it. I started my legal career as in Madera County, way in the Central Valley, for 3 years as a county counsel, deputy county counsel. And as I mentioned, I finished my career with State Comp insurance fund. I have served on the civil grand jury 2 terms, 2017-18 and 2018-19. And I'm very active with the Registrar of Voters in running a vote center. In fact, I'm looking forward to that activity in 2 weeks. So in a nutshell, that's who I am.
Harry, thank you so much. And Steve Batondo.
Yes, I've had the fortune to serve as a California educator for 38 years in my career, starting in this county, in Franklin-McKinley School District as a teacher, working in various school districts in various roles, from site administrator to curriculum director to assistant superintendent, HR director, and as superintendent. And actually, my career brought me full circle back to Santa Clara County to serve as superintendent in Morgan Hill in Santa Clara County. And I since retired, I have been working. There's a great need for people to fill in, and I encourage all those retirees out there to contact your schools and find out how you can help in whatever way. So when positions become vacant, I will fill in as an interim and such. And I do education, leadership consulting, coaching mostly as well. I also serve on the Walden West Foundation, which is a nonprofit fundraising group, 501c3, which raises funds to send kids that otherwise can't afford it, or schools that have a need to send their kids, raise the funds to get them to science camps and summer camps and such. So I feel very fortunate for my career, and there's some other organizations that I participate in, and happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think the common denominator with all of the 3 excellent panelists is service to the community and a desire to do more. I will facilitate today's discussion by asking a question. Any one of you can jump in, and it's a free-flowing discussion that hopefully will enlighten the community. I served on the Morgan Hill Unified School Board for 4 years, and I then ran for County Board of Education because I was alarmed that on one night a board voted to approve over 20 charter schools, forcing them upon districts that definitely did not appreciate that vote. So I ran and I served for 2 terms, and I served as the board president 2 years during the pandemic. And so thank you all. I'd like to start with the following. Most of us, our experience with any jury is to receive a summons in the mail, and for some people, it's an opportunity that they welcome, and for others, from the moment they open the summons, they try to figure out how to get out of serving on a jury, to be honest. And so I'd like to ask you about the civil grand jury. What are the qualifications for somebody to serve on the jury? And, why did you serve when so many seek to get out of jury service? And how do you differentiate between the civil grand jury and the summons that most of us receive in the mail? And any one of you could jump in.
So the grand jury system is a little separate from the regular jury system.
Mm-hmm.
So as you know, the summons that you get to serve on a jury is one of 12 members. And there'll be a pool, and they'll draw from the pool, and then the attorneys have an opportunity to disqualify. In the case of the civil grand jury, that's something that you apply to be a member of. So it's not something, at least in Santa Clara County, that you're drafted into. Mm-hmm. Some counties it may be that you are drafted. The smaller counties, which have difficulty getting volunteers, do have to go out and find a way to get civil grand jurors. So the grand jury system is contained in the California Constitution. from the very beginning. And as it's evolved, there are 3 different sizes. So a regular jury is 12 members. Grand jury depends upon the size of the county. So in Santa Clara County, it's 19. In the larger counties like LA, it's a greater number, and the smaller counties, I don't know what the number is, but greater than 12, but fewer than 19. The difference between a civil grand jury and a criminal grand jury is who controls it. So the purpose, and Harry is the best person to speak about that, the purpose of the criminal grand jury is part of the process of showing the court that there's sufficient evidence to take somebody to trial. In the case of the civil grand jury, the way it's been codified in the California legislature, attorney general opinions, and case law is that the grand jurors themselves decide what to investigate and what to report on. And the whole purpose of the civil grand jury is for a group of citizens to hold government accountable for 3 types of feasances. Nonfeasance, where they don't take action that they're supposed to be. Misfeasance, where they do it wrong. And malfeasance, where they're doing something inappropriate, that's bad, as opposed to something that's just wrong that they may not have been aware of why it's wrong. And so the purpose of the grand jury, the civil grand jury, is to point out those problems with how government operates. The jurisdiction has to be wholly within the county of Santa Clara.
Okay.
Has to be a government body, which means that it is either elected or paid for by taxpayer money. There are a set of rules how it operates, which we can get into an additional discussion.
So let me add the grand jury term. There is a new set of grand jurors that are selected every year. It's a fiscal year. So from you start July 1, your term ends June 30. So if people who are out there who are interested, and we'll talk about how you can apply, but those who may be interested in looking at serving on a grand jury, February of the year before the end of the term of June is when there'll be the court will be seeking applicants for the upcoming panel. So how are people selected? Well, first you need to put in an application, and then there's a form on the Santa Clara County Superior Court website that will show you how to fill out the application, when they're available. So you present an application, it's reviewed by the Superior Court, usually the presiding judge's department and that judge's assistants, and they filter. There's certain qualifications. You have to be a citizen over 18, so they'll filter out those applications. And then there is a vetting process, at least there was during my 2 terms, where you have an interview with the court, the judge or the judge's assistant, and they essentially are seeing how you interact with people, how you're going to be able to question individuals, go down and ask for documents, how you're going to interact with other grand jurors. And out of that process, your name then becomes one of many that will be selected. Then on selection day, which is usually the end of June, 19 names are drawn out, just like a criminal grand jury at random, and those become the grand jurors for the following year. Now, often, in many cases, there are what are called holdovers. So there's 2 or 3 grand jurors of the outgoing term that hold over to give some continuity. But generally, it's a 19-person panel, and generally there's 15 to 17 new people who are become the grand jurors for that new year.
Yes. Now, if you join a grand jury, there may be forces outside of your control that might keep you from completing your term. Are there alternates that can then be assigned to maintain that jury?
Yeah, so when the final So in the vetting process, typically they'll end up with 30 potential grand jurors. And then there's a randomizing process of pulling names out of a cage to select this 15 to 17 or so new grand jurors. The ones who aren't selected are kept in a list that can then be followed up with to fill in for those who might leave before their term is up.
Yes. And you may have answered this already. What is the length of term and commitment for those that sign up to be considered for a grand jury? Is it 1 year or 18 months?
It's 1 year. So it's like the first week of July. Actually, you're sworn in the last Thursday of June, I want to say. They disempanel the previous grand jury in a ceremony, and then they swear in. They select the new grand jurors, whether it's 15 or 17, how many made they're going to fill in for the new term. Those individuals are sworn in, and they start the following day. And it runs through June 30th of the next year.
Wonderful. Now moving on to the work at hand. So go ahead, Peter.
I want to make a couple
Yes,
additional
of course.
points.
Thank you.
So the challenge when you're a new grand juror is you have to come up to speed. And so there's a training process by the California Grand Jury Association, whose primary responsibility or interest, it's a 501c3, is to train new grand jurors. And they do a great job of it. So I lost my train of thought.
But there's support. There's training. Yes.
All right. So the issue is your useful life as a grand juror. So although you have a 1-year term, it takes you maybe 2 to 3 months to feel comfortable of your skills to be able to perform the role. And then maybe you have 6 months to do investigations and write. And then finally, the last 3 months, you're very busy meeting the deadline to get reports written and to have them vetted by the various parties that have to approve the issuance of it. And so you have a useful working life of 6 months. So a number of people say, well, that ends up saying that 1-year term is too short. And so in the group that I was part of in 2016-17, they said, we ought to do something about that. Well, it's very difficult to get the legislator to make that change. So there's a way that the jurors themselves can make the change, and that is by holding over. So you're now a fully experienced, after 1 year, grand juror who can then be fully productive on day one in their second year. And the penal code provides for up to 10 grand jurors to be held over.
Are there term limits? Is there a limit to the number of terms that you could serve on a grand jury?
No.
That's good to know.
No.
That's good to know. Now let's move on to the work of the grand juror. So the community members submit what would be a complaint or concern that is submitted for you to consider and to vet and to decide, like the Supreme Court would decide, these are the cases we're taking, adding to our docket. And what is that process like for the grand jury? And what do you consider in making the decision about what you will investigate and what you will decline to investigate?
Well, the process is like every decision is a decision that's made by the grand jury. And like every decision made by the grand jury has to be approved by a plurality, 12 members out of 19. So whether that's a decision to accept the complaint, a decision to organize ourselves, the grand jury, how we organize our grand jury and how we approach items, or any decision, approving a report at the end of the term, it has to be done by at least 12 members. And so my experience has been that the majority of the investigations that we've pursued to finality where we've written the report have been subject matter that has been of interest to some grand juror who's been able to convince at least 12 that this is a good topic to pursue. The rest are through complaints from members of the public. And there is a complaint form on that website I mentioned, Superior Court website. Here's a copy of it. It's 2-page, very simple to fill out. That is submitted to the grand jury. And you can usually possibly have a committee that will review these, a committee of the grand jury that will review the complaints and make a recommendation to the full plenary. It's just plenary meaning the full panel of 19. And the panel then votes up or down, we want to pursue this or not. Oftentimes may not be a committee that reviews the complaint. It's up to the full panel to read it beforehand, and then we have a discussion, and then it's a vote. Is this something of interest or not? Most of the time, it's usually after a discussion, it's a core member of people, maybe 4 or 5 or 6, who show an interest during the discussion of this particular topic, and that's how it becomes generated to the point where it's approved as a matter of investigation.
Very good. So, go ahead, Peter.
So the nice thing is, because everything is moving online, the complaint can be completely submitted online.
What's point?
So it can be filled out online and then submit. You don't have to deal with paper.
Very good. Thank you for that. So you've made the decision that you're going to investigate a particular entity. Are you the sole interviewers, the sole investigators? Does a grand jury have any support, or is the entirety of the work carried out by the jurors?
So this is where the civil grand jury, at least in Santa Clara County, is different than criminal grand juries or regular juries. And we are self-sufficient.
Okay.
There are funds available as needed, subject to the limit of a budget, where you can hire consultants. In my 2 years, we didn't make use of any consultants, any outside parties. So there's not a staff that deals with investigations or producing the reports. There's a support staff that provides the administrative support, such as providing you a meeting room, getting you printers, all those kind of things. And it's very valuable. Having parking and paying for mileage and things like that. So the administrative staff is an excellent support, but they don't participate in helping out on investigations or reports.
So you have made the decision as a body what entity you will investigate, and then you have the wonderful task of notifying those public officials, elected officials, that they will be the subject of an interview. Let's say, for example, that an elected official doesn't want to be interviewed. They feel that they're entitled to refusing, or they might feel that as electeds, they have a broader scope and they decline. I think I'm curious about the teeth that your invitation to be interviewed has. Do you have subpoena power? And maybe share a little bit about that, how you're able to compel testimony.
Well, first of all, the grand jury, Peter is correct in saying that there are funds for expert advice, such as possibly financial people, geologists, whatever it may be, to advise the grand jury. In my 2 terms, we never used it. We do have an assigned legal advisor, though, who works very closely with the grand jury, a member of the county counsel's office of Santa Clara County. Occasionally, it's a member of the district attorney's office, depending on what the investigation may be. So the legal advisor will advise the grand jury as to what they've run into if they're trying to interview a particular public official and what the problem is, and they will give us advice. To be honest, oftentimes the legal advice, what you get obtain cooperation by the legal advisor contacting the individual who you wish to interview, and they have a discussion. That usually resolves the issue. And many times that person you wish to interview wants the security of a subpoena. So that can be issued through the court.
Security and
Subpoena. So that is the ultimate power, is that we can request a subpoena from the Superior Court, and rather the county council, and they can issue that. And that's just like any other process of law, you must comply.
And that brings me to the next question. The level of veracity of the subjects that you interview. When you are interviewed by a grand juror, do you do so under penalty of perjury? If you could speak to that, I think it's a key component of getting correct information out of your interviews. I'd love to hear your thoughts about
You're
that.
sworn to tell the truth, so you have to take an oath. And so it's a criminal penalty then if you lie to the civil grand jury.
Okay, very good. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Because I am very interested, and I know the community is as well, on the grand jury report of 2018 that looked into the County Office of Education. And I should share at this point that Santa Clara County is only one of 5 counties in the entire state of California that still appoints their superintendent.
Out of 58 counties.
Thank you, Steve, out of 58 counties. So are we ready to jump into 2018? Are you ready to go back in time and share the findings and the recommendations?
I am, but let me just add one more sort of more background to the grand jury process. And that is the individual. We talked about the term of the grand jurors is 1 year, but let's talk a little bit about the time commitment. It's fairly true to say that you can put as little or as much time into it as you wish. Hopefully, during the vetting process of becoming an applicant, it becomes clear to the court that you're someone who's willing to spend as much time and that you're energized and enthusiastic about this role that you're about to play. So unfortunately, that probably excludes a lot of people who are full-time employed, full-time students, regrettably. Possibly those who are looking for employment. So it's the institution itself really makes it difficult to have a quite complete, diverse makeup of a grand jurors, unfortunately. This court is making extremely good efforts to try to improve that diversity on the panel. So, but the time commitment, I would say it's almost like a full-time job, from 20 sometimes to 30 hours per week. After you've been trained and you're involved in your investigations, you're looking at documents, you're reading documents, you're obtaining documents, you're interviewing people, you're putting together interview questions, you're meeting with your group, the investigation group, and going over what you've found out, what you need to find out. Then you're in a process, if you decided that you're going to write a report at the end of the term, you're in a process then of writing that report, drafting it, editing it, going out again for additional interviews, getting additional documents, editing the report again. So it is a very, it's time consuming, it's sometimes tedious, but it's a process that you have to follow in order for your report to be a good document that will be useful for the community.
And not every investigation results in the final product of a report. Peter, did you want to add something?
Yeah, it's an important thing within Santa Clara County, and the court takes great pains to ensure this, that there's great diversity in who serves. Geographic diversity, ethnic diversity, male-female diversity. So they end up having the vetting process. Unfortunately, we're now getting at least 60 applicants, and even more. And it gets boiled down to 30 approximately. And 30 is the number that during selection day get put into the cage for being drawn out. So having that diversity is an essential ingredient, both for the public to feel confident that there's fairness in the investigation, that all views are represented, but also that different backgrounds helps the group be more effective. So it's a very important objective.
Absolutely, and thank you for that. How is it, and I understand that those that file a complaint, they can expect confidentiality, correct? And
It is a secret document.
Very good. How is it that the jury you served on that looked in it and investigated the County Office of Education to then conclude your report, without disclosing who submitted the complaint, are you at liberty to say why it is that the jury voted to conduct this investigation? And if not, we could move on to your findings and recommendations. You can't blame me for asking.
No, we are constrained by secrecy even after we leave the grand jury.
Okay.
So my comments, as well as Peter's probably today, will be just limited to what's actually in the
Very
report. We cannot go beyond our discussions in the plenary sessions, why we made a decision, why we didn't, who made the complaint.
Of course.
Process.
Of course. Thank you.
And it's been 6 years, so some of us
Remember.
have a more challenging
good.
time trying to...
Yes. Yes, so it's been well, thank you. Well, let's start with that. So you conducted the investigation, and this one did result in a report. So why don't we take a deep dive into that, the findings and the recommendations?
So as the report mentions, there was an investigation as to why the number of county superintendents of education were 5 within the past 11 years, why there were 5 superintendents that were hired and then resigned or were fired within 11 years. And let me back up a minute. And as mentioned before, our county is one of 5 that the superintendent of education is appointed by the Board of Education. The Board of Education is an elected position. There's 5 trustees. There's a trustee for each 7?
7 Santa Clara.
I'm sorry, 7 trustees, 1, and they're elected by district.
Yes.
So in the case of Santa Clara County, they are elected. Not all counties are elected.
Right.
Sometimes they're appointed.
Right.
Or supervised.
So, and the trustees, the board, who are the Board of Education members, then appoint the superintendent. So the report of the 1718 grand jury pointed out that there were 5 superintendents over the past 11 years. And the question that was under investigation is, why was that? So there...
Especially in comparison to those 53 other counties where it's elected, and they, on average, served for 8.5 years, versus the 2.5 for the pool that we talked about.
So the report indicates that there was a lot of the reason for that turnover was the disagreements between the Board of Education and the appointed superintendent. There was, as pointed out, there was felt to be some management by the Board of Education over the superintendent's staff. So under California law and Attorney General opinions, the superintendent controls his or her staff. They direct his or her staff, and they fire and hire his or her staff. It is not the Board of Education. The Board of Education's only administrative responsibility directly of personnel is the hiring and firing of the superintendent. So there was indication that there was some interference, hyper-management by the Board of Trustees over the superintendent's staff. That was part of the issues. The report pointed out that there was not necessarily a unanimous concern by local superintendents of local school districts over their relationship and assistance and working relationship with the superintendent of education. But that was anyway. There was some that were concerned, some were not. The report pointed out that in hiring and firing 5 superintendents, that it was very costly to the Board of Education because of the need to vet and to locate and vet new superintendent candidates. So it was over $1 million for these particular 5. So that was money that came out of the budget that was not necessarily could not be used for student services.
Harry, thank you for that. And I know that Steve will share some thoughts on really the search process and the cost to the community about that. So I look forward to hearing that from you, Steve. Peter, go ahead.
I'd like to add one more point, though.
Yes.
As pointed out by the Board of Supervisors' response, electing the superintendent is not without a cost. Mm-hmm. So elections can be quite expensive, especially where it's countywide. Mm-hmm. If it's an existing election anyway, yes, then it's relatively small additional cost to add one more body to the ballot. But otherwise, it could be well over $1 million to hold an election. Mm-hmm. So you have to recognize it's having an elected official is not free.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but adding that election to, let's say, a presidential election year,
it's gubernatorial. So the Board of Supervisors, I believe that by California law, the time of election
has to align with the gubernatorial race. Thank you for that. That's a very important point. Thank you. Go ahead.
So the upshot of the investigation and the report was that the grand jury made these findings as to the problem with retention of a superintendent, the apparent conflict between the superintendent and the Board of Education, the costliness of trying to vet and retain superintendents. And it made 2 findings. One is that it made 2 recommendations. One is that the superintendent should be elected. 2, it pointed out that the county charter and the county ordinance code, because of a glitch 20 years ago, had removed the authority as to how you select both the Board of Education and the county superintendent. So the grand jury recommended that the Board of Supervisors, either by ordinance or charter amendment, do 2 things. One is that they put into law how you're going to select the Board of Education, whether it's appointed or elected. And 2, that you put into law how you would select the superintendent, again, appointed or elected. In response to this report by the county of Santa Clara, the Board of Supervisors, was that we agree that there is no provision currently for how you select the Board of Education. We disagree that there is no provision in place as to how you select the superintendent. We disagree because it is clear that the will of the people back before when the charter was first placed in place by the county, that the people, the voters, agreed that the superintendent should be appointed. Therefore, when that provision was removed from the charter, there was no intent by the voters to change that. That was the Board of Supervisors' position. So the board went ahead, subsequent to the report, by actually putting in an ordinance how they select the members of the Board of Education. They did nothing to change or to make it more transparent how the superintendent is selected. Again, falling back on their in view that since the voters never changed anything in the charter, that therefore they never indicated an intent that the superintendent should be anything other than appointed.
Based on the current concern that has been in the news, I can report that there is renewed interest in revisiting this, and very passionate and profound interest in looking at this. I'm sure you saw news coverage about the number and the diversity of community members that were calling on the current Board of Supervisors to put this to the voters and give the voters an opportunity to decide whether someone who is in this very key role should be elected by the voters. So hence that we have this discussion here. And I don't know if you're able to answer this, but you mentioned that there was a tension between the Board of Education trustees and the superintendent vis-a-vis the role of the trustee. Now, the Board of Education is not a taxing entity. The trustees on the local level have some purview over school sites where students are enrolled, yet that is not the same role as the county Office of Education trustee. Are you able to speak at all as to maybe a little bit more specifically about perhaps resistance or simple ignorance about that the county education trustees had about their role? Yes, Peter.
So I have a couple of thoughts.
Yes.
In part because I've served on a high school board. There can be conflict between the superintendent of a local district as well as the county and the Board of Trustees. That's inevitable in human interactions. What's interesting to me is that of the 58 counties, 5 have chosen, for whatever reason, which is another interesting discussion, to have it be appointed instead of elected. So the question is, what characterizes those 5 counties that ended up having appointed? And they're not so they tend to be the largest ones. So it's San Diego, it's Los Angeles, Santa Clara County, Sacramento, and San Francisco. Leaving out the very large Oakland, and I presume Orange County is larger than Sacramento in terms of population. So it's not the top persons trying to get in. So it's not necessarily the 5 highest population counties. And so we can have political science debate about why did these 5 ended up being the ones that have appointed instead of letting the people decide. So there's a similar question about county officials. We have the DA who's elected, we have the sheriff who's elected, and in our particular case, we have the assessor who's elected, plus then the 5 supervisors. Probably every county in California has an elected sheriff, I would guess. Probably every county has an elected DA. Probably not every county has an elected assessor. So just like there's a value in having it elected, there's a value in having it appointed. In the case of the 31 school districts of Santa Clara County, all of those superintendents are appointed. None of those are elected. And for the most part, the school districts throughout California are probably all appointed superintendents. And so it's not completely clear what is the right answer. And it would take a superintendent to shed light on that. It's beyond my understanding what's better.
And that sounds like an invitation for you to express an opinion about this, Superintendent Basando.
Well, I think the right answer depends.
Yes.
As everything does. So, as we know, our democracy and elections are not perfect. We know that more recently in the recent years than ever before, I believe. But what is obvious is that if anyone is hired into the position and is beholden to an organization or to a process, on keeping their position, that's going to have influence. When it comes to the position of a superintendent of a school district, as you mentioned, those are by appointment. And so those appointments are made by the board. That is not an elected position. The process includes, or may include, many individual or smaller processes when it comes to a board making an appointment or hiring a superintendent. And that may include outreach to the community to get input. It may be a public discussion or any discussion about what characteristics that you want in a new superintendent has to be done in public. And it may include some outreach, and certainly in the process, once it gets further into the selection process, it would include a background, which is not necessarily public. But when it comes to an elected county superintendent position, that may have its own set of processes as well, which can be codified in some sort of law or county regulation, or but that may include an outreach to the community. But when it comes to an elected position, the candidates present themselves and put themselves up on the ballot based on their criteria or qualifications. So as you mentioned before, the elected process doesn't come with certain costs. For instance, hiring a search firm, which is a great cost to an organization. It would not include a set of interviews which come with the cost in setting those up, along with the search process. It doesn't come with the cost of doing visitations to where the individual might currently exist in their career. But it does come with the cost of getting it on the ballot, pure and simple, and there may be other related costs for that. But again, who is the superintendent or the hired person, appointed person, whether it be by election, selection by election, or appointment by a board, who is that person beholden to will have influence over how they perform their job. What we know with county superintendents, especially in Santa Clara County, is that the influence of the board, depending on the issues, may have influence directly to what the superintendent is able to do while keeping their job, or not able to do while trying to keep their job. During my time in Santa Clara County as a superintendent, I was able to witness that the county superintendents, the line of county superintendents in the short time that I was here as superintendent, were definitely influenced and had some contentious issues with the board, which drawing the conclusion is that was the cause of the separation of the superintendent, whether it be the superintendent initiating the separation or the board initiating the separation. Since Santa Clara County is a county, one of the 5 of the 58 counties that has appointed positions by the board, that generated the avenue of a search firm which would come in and advise on a process in agreement with the board. And that process naturally, generally includes outreach to community members across the county to ask, what do you want to see in your next superintendent? What characteristics do you want to see? Not only leadership characteristics, but qualifications when it comes down to, are you going to want somebody that's been a superintendent before or an executive leader before? Are you going to want somebody that has come from the school sites has had experience teaching, or maybe they didn't have to have experience teaching. The superintendency is not required a teaching credential. So there are districts in county. Go ahead.
The county county superintendent does not, but district superintendents must have a teaching.
Right. Yes. Right. Thank you for that clarification. So, and so that means that, and it has occurred, that it could be a lawyer that is appointed as the county superintendent. And so that process is structured, but not necessarily a neat process. The outreach could come in different ways with technology. It could come into submitting information online, which is gathered by the search firm. The search firm process is not necessarily the same or parallel from search to search. It's really up to the board to determine what they want the search firm to do, and there has to be an agreement based on that. There are large and small search firms. There are dozens of search firms available, and some operate in the way that they want the board to be exclusively the body that not only knows who the candidates are, but have a say in the hire of those candidates. And there's other boards that will invite community panels and technical panels in the search process. So there's a variety of things. What the concern about who the superintendent or who the employee is beholden to is still the number one issue. And when it comes to the operation of a district, a board is not the managing body of the district. The superintendent is the leader of the managing body of the district. So there is a bit of a conflict there if there is interest in a board as a whole or individual board members with a desire to influence the management and the hiring process within the district itself.
And the tension that you found in your report between the board and the superintendent at this point, which has renewed interest in that 2018 report, is that the taxpayers have paid over $1 million because the County Board of Education has hired and fired and been engaged in what observers find to be a sort of lawyer shopping, in that the board is hoping to expand their scope to the tune of over $1 million, and that's been widely reported.
So my personal view is that the $1 million is a red herring. That the issue is the effectiveness of the superintendent. And you want a superintendent who serves the population of the county and the students and the teachers and so on. And so it's critically important that that process be as close as possible to an ideal selection. And it occurred to me, just as we're speaking, that there's a hybrid solution to this, which is comparable to what Superior Court and Appeals Court judges go through. So there's a process. So we, on our current November ballot, there are two employees of the DA's office who are running for a judge position in the Superior Court. So I don't know the circumstances, but there's a process where judges the first time around are appointed by the governor in this case. And then once that initial term is up, they have to stand for election and re-election. So getting started, there might be a value in the vetting process of the search firm. That might be more valuable than less informed public selection by popularity of some type. So the election process is a very imperfect one in terms of judging professional skills. So it may be that there's a value of having a search firm or a process where people with that background make that initial selection. But after the first term or maybe that's the next election cycle, that position be up for the population, the citizens to endorse.
Is there anything else that we want to review from the 2018 report, the recommendations, the findings? Because I'd like to move us, when we conclude that portion of the discussion, to the entities that were in receipt of that report and what their reaction and opinion was. So can you add a list of recommendations that you submitted when you concluded your investigation?
So the recommendations were that primarily that the superintendent position be elected position, like the other 53 counties at that time. This is 2018. And then two other recommendations to the Board of Supervisors. One is that they put into code or in writing, charter, ordinance, the manner of which the Board of Education in this county is selected. They're elected. Secondly, that they put into code or charter the manner of which the superintendent is to be selected, either elected or appointed. So the board so there were three entities that responded to this report: the superintendent's office, the Office of Education, the Board of Trustees, or the Santa Clara County Board of Education trustees, the second entity, and the third was the Board of Supervisors on behalf of the county. The Office of Education, which in this case was actually a response from the most recently fired superintendent, Ms. Dewan, was that it was not in her capacity to respond one way or another, since the report wasn't focused on her office. It was focused on the Board of Trustees and the County Board of Supervisors.
And she had just been hired.
She'd just been hired, right. And so to your point, she was laying low. She was wanting to work for the students. And the Board of Education responded, as you would imagine, that they disagreed with the the recommendation that the superintendent should be elected, not appointed. They disagreed with the findings about the manner of which their working relationship was functional or not functional with the superintendent's office. They essentially disagreed with all the findings. They had no choice. That was not within their province to decide to enact ordinances or county charter. So the key findings then, or the key recommendations, fell upon the Board of Supervisors. And as I mentioned earlier, the board they disagreed that there was any lack of authority as to how the superintendent was to be selected in this county. They agreed that there was a lack of authority because of the charter revision in 1990 that I referenced earlier. That was in the report. They disagreed, but they agreed that the selection mechanism for the Board of Trustees should be put into code. And they eventually did that. Several months later, there was an ordinance, and you can look up in the county's ordinance code, and you'll see how the Board of Trustees are now elected. I think it's a fair question for the members of the community to ask the Board of Supervisors. It's a fair question as to why there is nothing in writing in charter or ordinance at this present time as to why how the superintendent is selected. I think that's a fair question to ask the board. I, as a member of the public, would want to have something either in charter or an ordinance that tells me and my children how the superintendent's going to be selected, and that there is presently nothing in charter or ordinance.
And add to that the fact that the focus from the community on the report that was submitted years ago is because of the current events. And I also want to ask, do we know what it costs for the County Board of Education to hold elections to elect their members? And we may not know the number as we sit here today, but there is. Go ahead, Peter.
So I know that my school district, Los Gatos, Saratoga, had a recent parcel tax special election. That cost the two counties, which is Santa Clara and Santa Cruz counties, about $1 million. That was the only item on a mail-only election, $1 million. And the population, the number of registered voters, is like 36,000.
Okay.
Now look at, there are 1 million, a little over 1 million registered voters in Santa Clara County. So a special election would be just tens of dollars. But if it's an incremental on an existing election, if it's on a regular election cycle, like in the case of the gubernatorial election at the same time, and my guess, you're talking well over $1 million incremental that the county Office of Education has to pay the registrar of voters for all of the printed material as well as the space in the ballot that contains the ballot items. So there's a real incremental cost, even if it's not a special election. Certainly it's at least $1 million.
And again, the County Board of Education is not a taxing entity. They cannot vote to put a parcel tax on the ballot or a bond measure. And the role of the county trustee is limited, which has caused the tension that you found back in 2018, but now it has been elevated to the point of a significant cost of over $1 million on hiring attorneys that will perhaps tell them what they want to hear. And that's what the community is concerned about as well. Can we move on to discuss a little more on the response from the Board of Supervisors? Is there anything else you want to add to that?
To the report, the 2017-18 report.
Which, to clarify, was a non-response, correct?
Well,
This particular, with the
So again, the supervisors, so there were two recommendations. One was that the Board of Supervisors put into place to make it transparent to the residents and voters, put into place either in charter or ordinance, the manner of which the superintendent is selected, and the same charter or put into place for the same transparent reasons, the manner of which how the Board of Trustees of the Board of Education are selected. They agreed that they should put an ordinance or enact an ordinance to describe how the members of the trustees are selected. They're elected. That was done. They disagreed with the need of having to put into ordinance or charter the provisions as to the selection of the superintendent. The basis for that disagreement was, or the basis of the refusal to do that was that when the charter was revised in 1990 and the provision that actually did state how the superintendent was to be selected was removed inadvertently, we don't know.
And that provision, Section 503 of the charter, specified both how the Board of Education get elected or selected, as well as the superintendent
Being appointed.
Correct.
So that was removed in 1990 inadvertently. And so the recommendation was go back to the people with a charter amendment to put back into place either you're electing or you're appointing a superintendent. For my understanding, their position was that since even though the charter, that section 503 of the charter was removed, it was at that time clear to the supervisors in 2018 that it was an intent of the voters that the superintendent continue to be appointed. So we don't really need to reestablish that. I disagree with that.
And what's puzzling is there were two provisions that were in 503. The manner in which the superintendent gets selected and the manner in which the Board of Trustees gets selected. So inconsistently, the Board of Supervisors said, well, we don't have to do anything about restoring what was inadvertently removed having to do with the superintendent's selection. But we will go ahead and replace what was inadvertently removed with the selection process for the Board of Trustees.
On the Board of Trustees. And now there is most definitely an outcry because of the current events. And it must be gratifying for you, all the work that you put into investigating and making these recommendations, that the community is now paying attention to those recommendations and making their way to the Board of Supervisors to urge the board to put it to the voters whether the county superintendent should be elected, and also adding to the fact that the state superintendent is elected. Any thoughts about that?
I'll restate, I think it's a fair question for members of the community to the Board of Supervisors as to why they have not decided to put into charter, into writing, so it's transparent to everyone as to how the superintendent is selected.
Very good.
Remember, that was the 2018 Board of Supervisors.
Yes.
Right.
So this is now the 2024. In November, we'll have a let's see, how many were there in 2018 that are still there in 2024?
Joseph Midian?
No, but he'll be gone.
Yes.
So,
you're talking about how many? Yes. So he will be gone. He will be gone, and Cindy Chavez as well. There's definitely a shift. But I think
it's completely, that's right. So come January, none of those Board of Supervisors will have been on the Board of Supervisors in 2018.
And there's
so
a
they
new
may have
climate.
a completely different attitude. And of course, Supervisor Ellenberg comes from the education, she's an attorney, and she served on the San Jose Unified School District as a trustee as well as the president of the board.
And the new climate of the community that is very, very concerned and alarmed. I want to go ahead, Steve. Yes, absolutely.
In thinking about the differences, because I know that the public would want to know what the differences are between the superintendent of the county and the superintendent of a district.
Yes.
Maybe you could touch a little bit on that and what the constitutional authority of the county superintendent might be, or statutory authority that is different than a district superintendent. And also, from my perspective as a past superintendent, understanding that there's a great amount of communication between the district superintendents and the county superintendents when it comes to advising on process, law, procedures, program, human resources, on and on. And district superintendents really depend on the advice from the county superintendent without undue influence from anybody, including a county board, to give different type of advice or preferential advice based on their position or the county board's position.
So the County Office of Education, which is headed by the county superintendent, performs a lot of functions for the smaller school districts, payroll. I'm trying to remember now from the report.
Professional development for teachers. There are also the fiscal agent.
Right.
Yes, it's also the SELPA.
And sometimes IT services.
Absolutely, absolutely.
The largest school districts, not so much that type of assistance. The County Office of Education also runs the programs in juvenile hall. They run special education programs. They run outreach programs that are not necessarily run or programmed or formatted by the local districts. The Board of Trustees handles appeals for charter schools, for suspension of students, expulsion of students. They do those types of appeals.
District appeal.
Correct, interdistrict appeals. Okay, so yeah, I'm talking to the expert here, so I should be talking, but...
and reorganization of school districts.
Oh, yes. So, but you're correct, Steve, in saying that the the local district superintendents really must have a great working relationship and rely upon the county superintendent, because they're a resource, as well as providing possibly a person who can support them in front of the legislature or the board of trustees.
It is their responsibility if there's a district that might have a failing program or declining enrollment and needs to close schools, that the county superintendent is there to support.
Or fiscal turmoil.
Right.
So I'd like to close by thanking each and every one of you for participating in this panel. It is in response to the outcry of not only the education community, but really the community at large. Thank you for your work as a grand juror that created, along with your colleagues, this recommendation, which now has the attention of the community. And thank you to each one of you, and to those of you that will tune in. We say goodbye. Thank you very much.
And make sure you vote.
Make sure you vote. Yes.